Hello, everyone. My name is Anne Cowling, and I am your host for tonight. I would like to welcome you to the Story Café, somewhere over the rainbow, stories of hope and transformation. Our next teller is Gordon Churchill. Now, Gordon Churchill is a storyteller, a woodworker, and an artist. He will give you the Yiddish story, which is called Wisdom versus Luck. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gordon.
Thank you so much. I am always fascinated when I get introduced to see what kind of things they're going to say about me and then what I have to live up to. So thanks so much, Anne. I was given this story by Anne, who asked me to tell it. And so I felt a little bit uneasy about it because I'm aware of the whole discussion around cultural appropriation. And this is a Yiddish story, and I don't have a Yiddish bone in my body. So I decided that I would do a little bit of introduction to the story, which might set it up a little better for you to understand what I'm saying. There was a Yiddish organization in Vilna in the late 1800s who decided that there was a rich and deep cultural heritage of the Yiddish community across Eastern Europe. And so as people were going out into all of the villages and towns doing business and doing all the other things that it did as they traveled, they were also charged with being curators of cultural artifacts. And they were asked to write down if they heard a story or they heard a song or someone made an aphorism or a wise saying or they heard something profound in the local synagogue and send it back to Vilna. And over a period of about 50, 60 years, the Yiddish organization in Vilna collected everything. But in 1940, when the Nazis took Eastern Europe, Vilna, of course, fell under the Nazis, and the collection was evaluated by the Nazi regime. Some of it was burned, and the rest of it was preserved as discussion of, quote unquote, the Jewish problem. In 1945, the Americans liberated that part of the world, and they took the entire collection, boxed it up, and sent it to a Yiddish organization in New York City. When it arrived, they found that there were 50,000 bound volumes and 30,000 cultural artifact files. Those were all unpacked and began to be sorted through. And an author working for Pantheon Press sat down and looked at the entire collection and picked out a number of stories that were then published in a book called Yiddish Stories. And this one, Wisdom or Luck, comes from that collection. It seems that wisdom and luck were both walking down the same road on the same day. And as they were walking together, they fell into a discussion as to which of them was greater. Wisdom said, well, I have the ability to form and shape all knowledge and all culture. Nothing would happen without me. Ah, Luck said, that may be so, but it takes you a long time. What I do happens in seconds. And so the debate went and went back and forth and back and forth. And about the same time that they were having this debate, a boy was being born in a poor village to a single mother, a child with no advantages in life. And the two of them decided that they would make this boy an experiment. One of them would enter into his life and see what could be done. Wisdom said, I'm in for the long haul, so why don't I go first? Luck said, go ahead. So Wisdom entered into the boy's life, and about 15 years of age, he managed to get an apprenticeship with a goldsmith. The goldsmith quickly realized that this boy was brilliant. He not only learned everything that the goldsmith knew, but he began to invent some things on his own and make things the goldsmith had never seen. The goldsmith was delighted with him. But the boy realized at the end of the year that he knew everything that the goldsmith knew, and there was no challenge left. And so he went to the goldsmith and he said, I would like to leave and go somewhere where I can learn more. And the goldsmith was very sad about that. And he didn't want to lose this fellow because he was his best employee. But he knew that if he didn't let him go, the boy would become bored and he'd lose him anyway. And so he said, sadly, go ahead. Well, the boy went to the capital city of the region, and there he got himself another apprenticeship, this time not with a goldsmith, but with a tailor. And this tailor was a very influential man who had contracts for the robes and all of the clothing for the court of the king in that city. The boy began to work, and very soon the tailor realized that this boy's ability was superior. He was turning out garments that no one had ever seen before or even dreamed of. So the tailor supplied these to the court, and when the king sat down upon his throne and looked at all of the people in court, so beautifully dressed and robed, he said, where's all this coming from? He said to the tailor, how have you come up with all these new clothes? And the tailor said, well, I take my responsibility to the court very seriously. And I have been staying up nights thinking about things. And of course, I wanted to do the very best job I could, so I supplied my very best. Oh, the king was very pleased and amply rewarded the tailor, who did not pass any of that back on to his apprentice. He kept it all for himself. Now, about this time, the king had a daughter, and this daughter was brilliant, sharp as a tack, and she was coming of marriageable age. Well, what do you do with her? How do you get her? How do you choose someone for her? How does she choose? Well, the daughter solved the problem. She said, Father, we'll have a contest. Any man that can make me talk, I will marry. But just to clean out the riffraff. Anybody who doesn't make me talk, take off his head. Boo. The father said, well, as you wish. Now, there were many young men in that city who thought, it can't be that hard to make a girl talk. I can do that. And besides, she was ravishingly beautiful. So many young men tried, and many families lost a son. Well, our apprentice to the tailor heard about this, and he said, what have I got to lose? I'm never going anywhere working for this tailor. I will always be poor. I might as well try. So he gave his notice to the palace that he wished to speak with the princess and see if he could make her talk. Now, the king had appointed that there would be observers in the room to witness if anybody made the princess talk. But all of those observers had seen so many young men come and go. And they'd been so saddened, you might almost say post-traumatic stress, that they didn't even bother watching anymore. The young man walked into the room where the princess was, and he did not engage with the princess at all. He looked around the room and, oh, there in the middle of the table was the most beautiful candelabra. And he walked over to it. And he said, "Oh, Candelabra, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm sure that you've sat on this table for many wise discussions and you can give me profound advice. I have a problem that I cannot decide, so I will tell you my problem, and then I would really appreciate your guidance. You see, there were three men. One was a woodcarver, one was a tailor, and one was a teacher. And between the three of them, they got into an argument one night at the pub as to which of them was the greatest. And there wasn't that much work for them in the village anyway. And so they decided that as there wasn't that much work, they would go on a journey and they would take an experiment to see which of them was greater. And so they set out. Now, on their first night out, they were in the middle of the dark and dreary forest, a place where you didn't want all three of you asleep at the same time. Something just might happen. And so they decided that they would take shifts. The first to go was the woodcarver. The other two laid down and went to sleep, and the woodcarver looked around and evaluated the different pieces of wood and found a nice piece of log and set it up and got out his hammer and his chisels, and he began to work on it. And within about 2 hours, he had the most beautiful woman carved. But she was naked. And when he was done, he woke up the tailor and he went off to sleep. And the tailor, seeing this gorgeously beautiful but naked woman, said, "Well, we must provide her clothes. I can make her beautiful." And so he got out his needles and his threads and his yards of cloth, and he made the most beautiful, exquisite clothing for her and a hat. At the end of his 2 hours, he lay down, and then the teacher got up. Well, here was this beautifully well-dressed, engaging young woman, but she wouldn't talk to him. And he thought, "I'm a teacher. I know what I can do about this." And so he used all of his skill and all of his ability, and he engaged her in conversation. He got her talking. And the other two woke up, and there they were, engaged in conversation. And then the three of them fell into an argument. "Well, obviously, I made her. She's beautiful." "Ah, but I made her more beautiful. That's me." And then the teacher said, "Ah, but I taught her how to speak, how to communicate, how to express herself." Candelabra, which of these three do you think is greater? And the princess, who had been listening this whole time, stepped in and said, "Well, it seems to me that the one that could make her talk was obviously the wisest and the best of the lot." And then she realized he had made her talk. So she went off to find her father, and he suggested that she get herself dressed for the nuptials. And the servants who hadn't been listening thought that the young man, in fact, hadn't done anything. So they picked him up, one arm on each side, and they took him out and they set him in front of the executioner. And the executioner picked up his sword and he was about to swing it at the young man. And Luck said to Wisdom, "Hey, what you got?" Wisdom said, "I got nothing. Would you like me to try?" "Knock yourself out," he said. Well, Luck just stepped into the picture. And didn't the young woman at that moment just step out of her apartment and see the executioner with his sword up, and she yelled, "Wait! Why are you killing the man I want to marry?" Well, the king was aghast. And he made sure that the wedding happened, and he made sure that the poor servants also lost their heads for not being careful of his daughter and her husband. So, you might say on the basis of this, yeah, wisdom is great. This young man had had nothing in life if it hadn't been for wisdom. On the other hand, He wouldn't have kept his head if it hadn't been for a little luck. And on the one hand, you might say, well, there wouldn't have been a collection of stories at all if some wise people in Vilna hadn't sent out curators all over the Ukraine. On the other hand, isn't it lucky that the Germans didn't burn that story? Nah, maybe on the other hand, life is better when you have a little wisdom and a little luck.
Thank you so much, Gordon. That was absolutely fantastic. Yes, indeed, luck can help no end. Well, as you know, one can start off in one direction, and with growth, there's transformation, and all sorts of exciting things can happen. Here's Gordon again with a personal story about a little tree called How the Sprout Changeth. Gordon?
Thanks so much. I was thinking as Wendy was wrapping up her story that 35 years ago, 4 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, and 4 hours ago, I quit smoking. And I can still tell you exactly when that was, and I miss it every day. So it may be that the world has changed, but I'm still the same person I always was. Once upon a time, I think it was 50, 60, could be 70 years ago. Nobody's exactly sure when or exactly where it happened. But the very nub of the start of this story took place. A bird ate a berry off a tree. And it wasn't an important berry. It was just an ordinary berry. It was one of the 200 some berries and seeds and worms and things that bird had eaten that day, and it used it for fuel to, well, make eggs and chase other birds and keep warm, look for more food. The next day, that bird, flying across the field, did what birds often do. It shat out that seed out of the back of it, and the seed landed in the furrow in the field, and the seed did exactly what seeds do. It put down its root, put up a stem, started to create some seed, some leaves on the stem. And it took a little bit of moisture and a little bit of that bird shit. Yeah, that helped out too. Some nutrient and some sunlight. And it did what we don't know how plants do, but we know that they do it. It transformed all those elements and made it into wood. And it was probably there for, I don't know, almost a year. And the nurseryman who owned that field was walking across the field, and he came across this little sprout coming up in the field. And he stopped and he looked at it. What are you? Kind of pretty. I think I'll take that. And so he went back, he got himself a shovel and a bucket, and he dug it up, and he took it in, and he put it in what he called the holding bed. Stuff he didn't quite know what it was, but it was interesting, and he'd hang on to it till he knew what it was, if it was useful or not. Well, that little seedling sat in the holding bed for, must have been 7, 8 years, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Grabbed a little bit of light, a little bit of moisture, a few nutrients out of the soil, and every year it added another ring to that stem so that it started to get bigger, a little more girth every year, and it grew taller. In that 7, 8 years, it was probably up 6, 7 feet. 2 main leaders coming up. Well, The nurseryman one day got a telephone call from a developer in Calgary here, and the developer said, I got a new subdivision going into North Calgary, and I'm going to need a bunch of trees and bushes because the architect says that I'm supposed to have 2 trees and 4 bushes for every house, and I've got 200 houses. Can you help me out? Well, sure. Come around on Thursday and we'll have a look. Got lots of things. So they went around with a clipboard and they marked down everything that was to be included in the subdivision, and they came to the holding bed, and the developer looked at the little tree and said, huh, what's that? Well, said the nurseman, I'm not exactly sure what it is. I'm thinking mulberry. All right, mulberry it is, and he wrote it down. And about a week later, a tree spade came and took up the little tree. They wrapped it in burlap, put it on a flatbed, took it into Calgary, dropped it and another tree and some bushes in the yard. And that's how it got to be planted in the front yard of a house. The people who'd bought the house were a young couple on their way up, and they were there about 5 years. Every summer, they watered the grass and they fertilized the lawn, and the tree just did what it did. It took things and made itself bigger, and it grew. So that at the end of their time, well, we're talking about a tree about 10, 12 feet tall. A new young couple bought the house. They didn't have any kids, but they were just getting started. And when the first baby was born, well, they put him out in the pram out underneath the tree in the leaves, in the shade. And then when his sister came along, well, the two of them, they would play in the shadow of that tree. And then when those kids got a little bit bigger, well, they set up their lemonade stand right in the shadow of that tree because it was a nice place to be, until they learned that you sell more lemonade if you move out of the middle of the yard up onto the sidewalk where everybody can see you. And when the boy, the oldest, was, I guess he must have been about 14, we think he probably took his first kiss underneath that tree. Well, neighbor walking by the house one day said to the fellow who lived in the house, say, Charles, been watching your tree growing there. The one side of it, the leaves are curling up and looking pretty shabby. I think that side of your tree's got to come down. Well, Charles talked to his wife, and his wife said, no, we can't take that tree down. That's where our babies played, and that's where kids had the lemonade stand. And well, she thought maybe James had had his first kiss out there too, but she wasn't exactly sure. But when it comes down to a tree falling on a $40,000 car or preserving the tree, well, the tree went. So the neighbor coming by said, see, you cut the tree down. What are you going to do with the wood? Well, I don't know. Thought I might break it up and burn it. Oh, well, if you give me some of the wood, I'll promise you a bowl if I can get anything out of it. Well, I don't care. Take the whole log if you want. So the neighbor, in fact, did take the tree home and made himself a bowl. And this may be the bowl that ends up on their mantelpiece. Why do I tell you that story? I tell you that story because change and transformation is at the very root of the world we live in. You know, 14.6 billion years ago, there was one blinding flash, and everything that we can see and a lot of stuff we can't see was created. The carbon in your body, the iron in your car, the lead in your battery, all these things have come out of the hearts of stars, where energy was transformed into matter and became planets, became a universe. If you should ever lose heart, if you should ever get to that point where you're saying, nothing will ever change, everything changes. Everything transforms. That's the nature of where we live. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.